Joseph Campbell was born into a middle-class family of Irish roots, deeply marked by the Catholic tradition. From childhood, he displayed an unusual curiosity for reading, immersing himself in stories of saints, Christian myths, and narratives that led him to question the meaning of life and the place of human beings in the universe. This early contact with religious symbols shaped him, but did not limit him. For soon he would begin to explore other horizons, realizing that there were similar patterns in cultures completely different from his own. Campbell's childhood was, therefore, a stage of immersion in narratives of faith, but also the beginning of a journey that would lead him to see spirituality as something universal, something that went beyond the boundaries of any specific religion. During his youth, Campbell discovered one of the greatest passions that would mark his trajectory: literature. At the age of 7, he encountered the legend of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, and this moment was so impactful that it turned into an obsession with reading myths and epics. From then on, Campbell plunged into distant worlds, studying stories of Native American peoples, Greek mythology, Hindu texts, and medieval poetry. He not only read these works, but also sought connections among them, trying to understand what was universal in the adventures of gods, heroes, and common men. This comparative perspective would be the seed of what later became known as the monomyth, the idea that there exists a single structure uniting all human stories. In his university years, Campbell began his academic training in English and French literature, but his true passion lay in the disciplines of mythology and anthropology. His period of study brought him into direct contact with thinkers who would shape his vision. James Joyce, whose novel Ulysses impressed him with its use of mythical symbols within modern life, and Carl Gustav Jung, who defended the existence of universal archetypes, primordial images, inscribed in the collective unconscious of humanity. These intellectual encounters were decisive, as Campbell came to understand that myth was not merely a collection of ancient tales, but a symbolic language of the psyche, a way of translating profound human experiences into narratives that transcend generations. Beyond the intellectual field, Campbell had personal experiences that expanded his sensitivity. He spent time studying in Paris and later in Munich, where he approached the modernist movement and expressionist art, absorbing the idea that art and mythology were bridges to the same goal, revealing the mystery of existence. This exposure to different forms of artistic expression led him to believe that every symbol, whether in an abstract painting, a Greek myth, or a tribal ritual, carried the same function: to awaken the human being to invisible dimensions of reality. Another defining point in his formation was the economic crisis of the Great Depression, which forced him to interrupt his formal studies. Campbell, however, did not waste this period of isolation. For 5 years, he dedicated himself to intensive reading in libraries, studying mythology, religion, anthropology, psychology, and comparative literature in a self-taught manner. This intellectual retreat was, in a way, his own hero's journey applied to life, a forced departure from the conventional world, a plunge into a universe of trials and knowledge, to later return with the transformed vision that would make him one of the greatest authorities in comparative mythology. From this combination of Catholic faith, medieval literature, global mythology, Eastern philosophy, Jungian psychology, and personal experiences, emerged Joseph Campbell's unique vision. A vision that allowed him to see that behind every myth lay humanity's attempt to deal with the great mysteries of life: the origin of the world, the meaning of suffering, the inevitability of death, and the search for transcendence. Campbell's formation, therefore, was not merely academic or intellectual, but existential. He did not study myths only to understand them, but to live through them, recognizing in them a spiritual map that all men and women carry within themselves. Joseph Campbell did not view myth as an archaeological curiosity or a relic of the past, but as something alive, pulsating, present in all cultures, capable of revealing profound truths about human experience. His true encounter with myth came when he began to perceive universal patterns in traditions that at first glance seemed to have nothing in common. In studying the mythology of Native American peoples, for example, he found parallels with stories from ancient Greece, biblical narratives, and even medieval folk tales. This shock of recognition was decisive. There was something underlying, a common symbolic structure that transcended geographic, linguistic, and religious boundaries. Still young, Campbell immersed himself in Eastern texts, particularly Hindu and Buddhist scriptures. When reading the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita, he realized that the narratives of Krishna, Arjuna, and the Vedic gods connected, in surprising ways, with the dilemmas of Greek heroes such as Achilles, Odysseus, or Hercules. This realization fascinated him. How was it possible that cultures separated by oceans, without contact, had created such similar stories about life, death, spiritual journeys, and overcoming challenges? The answer, which he later consolidated in his work, lay in the psychological nature of myth. Myth was not arbitrarily invented, but emerged from an inner necessity of human beings to make sense of their deepest experiences. Another decisive moment came when Campbell studied European fairy tales. At first sight, they might appear to be mere stories to entertain children, but when analyzed through a symbolic lens, he realized they carried lessons about maturation, confronting fear, and integrating the shadow. The wolf that devours Little Red Riding Hood, the witch who imprisons Hansel and Gretel, or the stepmother who persecutes Snow White were not merely fantastic characters, but representations of the inner and outer forces that every individual must face on their path of self-discovery. This psychological reading of myths and fairy tales brought him even closer to the ideas of Carl Gustav Jung, reinforcing his conviction that mythical language was universal because it spoke directly to the human unconscious. His encounter with myth also took place through his experiences with Native American peoples. Fascinated by indigenous narratives, Campbell realized that their rites of passage, dances, and stories were not mere folkloric traditions, but ways of guiding youth and communities through the mysteries of life and death. By analyzing these rites, he saw that the experience of separation, ordeal, and return, so present in indigenous tribes, was also at the core of great epics and even the Christian Gospels. This recognition was an empirical confirmation of his thesis. The hero's journey was not merely a literary model, but a pattern of human transformation. Campbell was also profoundly marked by the reading of James Joyce, especially Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake. Joyce used classical mythology to structure modern stories, placing the common man in the role of the hero. This literary resource made Campbell understand that myth was not confined to the past or to ancestral peoples, but could be retold and reenacted in any era, even in the streets of a modern city. From this point on, he consolidated the idea that every individual lives their own hero's journey, even without realizing it, facing daily trials that shape and transform them. Therefore, Campbell's true encounter with myth was twofold: intellectual and existential. Intellectual, because in myths he found the key to understanding the psychological structure of humanity. Existential, because he came to see his own life as a journey, marked by departures, ordeals, and returns. Myth, for him, was not only a tool of study, but a mirror of the soul, a way of connecting with the human essence in any time and place. In 1949, Joseph Campbell published what would become his most influential work, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. More than just a book, this work was a turning point in the way the world came to understand human narratives. In it, Campbell gathered decades of study in comparative mythology, religion, anthropology, and psychology, proposing a bold idea. All stories, regardless of the culture or the time in which they arose, follow a fundamental structure that he called the monomyth. This structure was not merely literary, but reflected an inner journey that human beings, anywhere in the world, face in their quest for meaning and transformation. The first major contribution of The Hero with a Thousand Faces was to offer a clear map of the stages that make up the hero's journey. Campbell demonstrated that from the Epic of Gilgamesh through the adventures of Odysseus, the Buddhist parables and the Christian Gospels, to the folk tales passed down orally, all followed a recurring pattern. The hero is called to leave ordinary life, undergoes trials that test and transform him, encounters allies and enemies, faces the shadow, conquers an elixir, which may be wisdom, victory, or reconciliation, and returns to the world bringing something that benefits the community. This narrative, repeated in different forms, revealed something universal about the human condition. Another central point of the work was its relationship with psychology. Campbell directly engaged with the ideas of Carl Gustav Jung, especially the concepts of archetypes and the collective unconscious. For him, myths were not only external stories, but symbolic reflections of inner processes. The dragon to be slain can represent internal fear, the evil witch can symbolize the repressed shadow, and the wise mentor is the voice of intuition or spiritual consciousness. Thus, the hero with 1,000 faces became not only a literary or anthropological analysis, but also a psychological tool for self-knowledge, allowing readers to see their own lives as heroic narratives in progress. The impact of the work was immediate in the academic field, but its reach extended far beyond universities. Writers, filmmakers, playwrights, and artists found in Campbell a powerful structure for creating stories capable of deeply resonating with audiences. George Lucas was one of the first to publicly acknowledge Campbell's decisive influence on Star Wars, which follows the steps of the monomyth with precision. Later, authors like J.R.R. Tolkien, Hollywood screenwriters, and even video game creators were inspired by this narrative model. Modern cinema, to a large extent, owes its ability to generate empathy and emotional identification to the framework presented by Campbell. But the hero with 1,000 faces did not impact only the arts. In the spiritual and personal realm, the work offered the vision that all individuals, at different stages of life, are heroes of their own journeys. The call to face the unknown may arise in times of crisis, loss, or radical change. The ordeals are the daily challenges, from facing an illness to making decisions that require courage, and the transformed return symbolizes the capacity to overcome difficulties while also contributing to collective life. This practical reading made the book a timeless work, consulted not only by artists, but also by spiritual seekers, therapists, and teachers. The relevance of the hero with 1,000 faces remains alive because it is not limited to a historical period or cultural trend. Campbell built a universal model, applicable at any time, capable of uniting people around common symbols. His work demonstrated that, however different cultures may be, there is always an invisible thread connecting humanity. That thread is myth, and through it each individual is invited to recognize that life is a journey with purpose, challenges, and transformation. The central idea of Joseph Campbell's thought crystallizes in the concept of the monomyth, an expression he used to describe the universal structure present in narratives from all cultures and eras. The term, inspired by James Joyce, refers to the notion that there is only one great myth, told and retold in countless forms, but always following the same symbolic pattern. For Campbell, the diversity of myths does not obscure their unity. On the contrary, it reveals that behind cultural and linguistic variations, there is an archetypal script that expresses the very condition of being human. The monomyth, therefore, is more than a literary theory. It is a map of the experience of living, a spiritual cartography of the journey each person undertakes in search of meaning. This structure is organized into 3 major movements: departure, initiation, and return. In departure, the hero leaves the ordinary world, compelled by a call to adventure that disrupts routine and launches him into an unknown territory. Often this call is initially refused, since abandoning comfort requires courage. However, supernatural forces or mentors appear to assist, indicating that the journey is inevitable. Initiation corresponds to the plunge into the unknown, where the hero faces trials, enemies, allies, and symbols that deeply transform him. It is at this stage that encounters with archetypes such as the goddess, the shadow, and the symbolic father occur, culminating in apotheosis, the conquest of the elixir, or the ultimate reward. Finally, return marks the moment when the hero comes back to the ordinary world, bringing something that benefits not only himself, but the whole community, whether wisdom, knowledge, healing, or spiritual transformation. The monomyth is not an arbitrary invention of Campbell, but a recurring observation in mythologies, epics, and rites of passage throughout history. Gilgamesh, in the Mesopotamian epic, leaves his city to face gods and monsters and returns transformed by the awareness of mortality. Buddha leaves the palace to confront the reality of human suffering, achieving enlightenment and sharing the path of Dharma. Jesus endures the trial of the desert, faces the cross, and returns through resurrection, bringing the promise of eternal life. Each culture, in its own language, tells the same story: the journey of the human being toward overcoming self-knowledge and transcendence. The power of the monomyth lies in its symbolic nature. Each stage is not merely a narrative action, but a reflection of the inner transformations everyone experiences. The call to adventure can be lived as the need to change careers, begin a relationship, or face a loss. The plunge into the dark cave represents moments of pain, crisis, and doubt in which the individual is confronted with their deepest fears. The encounter with the mentor symbolizes the voice of wisdom that may come from a teacher, a book, or even an inner intuition. And the return is not simply coming back to the starting point, but being reborn into a new way of existing, carrying with it an expanded vision of life. This vision turned the monomyth into one of the most powerful narrative tools ever formulated. Writers and filmmakers found in it the key to constructing stories that resonate universally, because they speak directly to the collective unconscious. But beyond its artistic utility, the monomyth became an instrument of existential reflection. It reminds us that life is not a straight line, but a cycle of departures, ordeals, and returns. Each difficulty, each transformation, and each victory are part of a greater movement that brings us closer to realizing who we truly are. The monomyth is thus both a literary structure and a mirror of the soul, an invitation for each individual to recognize that behind their biography lies a heroic narrative in development. The hero's journey, as outlined by Joseph Campbell, is not sustained only by its narrative structure of departure, initiation, and return, but also by the constant presence of fundamental archetypes that give form and meaning to the stages of the adventure. These archetypes, which directly dialogue with Jungian psychology, are symbolic figures that appear in myths, legends, fairy tales, and even modern stories, representing inner forces, existential challenges, and profound aspects of the human psyche. Campbell identified and described them as recurring elements, indispensable for the heroic narrative to fulfill its transformative role. The first essential archetype is the hero, Chi. He is the protagonist of the journey, the one who accepts, or is forced to accept, the call to adventure. The hero is not necessarily an invincible warrior, but rather an ordinary individual who, by going through trials, awakens his inner strength. Gilgamesh, Moses, Buddha, Jesus, Odysseus, and even contemporary heroes of cinema illustrate this pattern, figures that represent the universal struggle of human beings against their own limitations, fears, and shadows. The hero symbolizes the courage to face the unknown and to carry the weight of transformation, not only for himself, but also for his community. The second key archetype is our mentor, or spiritual guide. This figure may appear as a sage, an elder, a teacher, or even as a supernatural manifestation. He represents the accumulated knowledge of generations and offers the hero tools, advice, or magical protection to help him begin his journey. The mentor does not walk the path for the hero, but gives him what is necessary to move forward. He is Merlin for King Arthur, Gandalf for Frodo, Obi-Wan Kenobi for Luke Skywalker. More than external characters, these mentors symbolize the voice of intuition and inner wisdom that awakens when we face crucial choices. Another central archetype is the eyeshadow. It appears as enemies, monsters, villains, or dark forces that oppose the hero's progress. However, the shadow is not only an external threat, but also the symbolic representation of fears, vices, and repressed aspects of the human psyche. The dragon to be defeated, the witch to be overcome, or the tyrant to be dethroned are images of the internal battle. Every individual fights against their own limitations. The shadow is indispensable because the hero only reaches transformation when he directly confronts it, recognizing that the external enemy is also a reflection of his inner weaknesses. The threshold guardians are another recurring archetype. They appear at the moment of crossing, when the hero leaves the ordinary world to enter the unknown realm. They are figures that test his determination, imposing initial obstacles that verify whether he is truly ready to move forward. They may be monsters, soldiers, magical creatures, or even difficult circumstances. Symbolically, they represent the natural resistances that always arise when we seek change: fear, doubt, social pressure, and the temptation to remain in comfort. Finally, we have the allies and the trickster. The allies represent the forces of friendship, loyalty, and solidarity that emerge along the hero's path, showing that no one accomplishes the journey alone. The trickster, on the other hand, is the archetype of irreverence and creative disorder. the one who breaks rules and challenges the seriousness of the narrative, reminding the hero that the path also involves unpredictability and humor. He may seem like a disruptor, but often he opens new possibilities and alternatives that would otherwise remain unseen. These archetypes, when understood in depth, reveal that the hero's journey is far more than a sequence of narrative events. It is a mirror of the soul, in which each character symbolizes a part of the human being in his process of growth and transformation. The hero is us. The mentor is the wisdom dwelling in our consciousness. The shadow is the side we must confront. The guardians are the initial fears. The allies are the bonds that sustain us. And the trickster is the creativity that allows us to reinvent the path. By recognizing these patterns, Campbell showed that myth speaks less about fantastic worlds and more about the inner adventure that all of us, without exception, must undertake. The first great phase of the hero's journey described by Joseph Campbell is departure, which marks the breaking of the hero with his ordinary world and the beginning of his passage into the unknown. This stage is fundamental because it symbolizes the necessary rupture for any profound transformation. No one becomes new by remaining in the same place. Departure is, therefore, a process of transition where inner and outer forces conspire to take the individual out of routine and launch him into the realm of myth, where the adventure unfolds. Campbell organized this phase into universal symbols, each representing a psychological and spiritual dimension of human experience. The first moment is the kayak call to adventure. It is the instant when something unexpected interrupts the hero's ordinary life and invites him to cross the threshold. This call may be a premonition, a tragic event, the appearance of a mysterious figure, or even an inner restlessness that pushes him to seek more than he already has. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, it is the death of his friend that leads him to question the meaning of life. For Buddha, it was the vision of human suffering, old age, disease, and death that impelled him to leave the palace. In modern life, this call may manifest as the need to change careers, face an existential crisis, or set out in search of a greater purpose. Immediately after the call comes the refusal of the call. Faced with the possibility of breaking away from his comfort zone, the hero often feels fear, doubt, and resistance. This stage is universal because it represents the natural tendency of human beings to avoid the unknown. Jonah, in the biblical tradition, flees from the divine mission when sent to Nineveh. Odysseus, in some versions, tries to evade the Trojan War by feigning madness. This refusal is necessary because it demonstrates that the hero's path is neither easy nor natural. It requires courage to overcome inertia and the temptation of safety. Once the refusal is overcome, the supernatural aid enters the scene. This is when the hero receives help from external forces, whether divine, magical, or manifested in the form of a mentor. This aid symbolizes that, although the journey is individual, no one walks completely alone. It may be a magical sword, an enigmatic piece of advice, a spiritual blessing, or an inner revelation. This archetype expresses the awakening of trust. When the hero accepts the call, the universe conspires in favor of his crossing. Next comes the crossing of the first threshold, the decisive point at which the hero definitively abandons the familiar world and enters the realm of adventure. This threshold is guarded by obstacles and challenges that test his determination. In many narratives, there are creatures, monsters, or figures of authority that represent the resistance of the ordinary world against change. Symbolically, it is the fear of the new, the pain of leaving behind the safety of the known, and the risk of plunging into the chaos of the unpredictable. Finally, there is the belly of the whale, which represents the complete immersion in the unknown. Inspired by the biblical account of Jonah swallowed by the great fish, this stage symbolizes the symbolic death of the hero in his old form and the beginning of his transformation. Entering the belly of the whale means accepting darkness, loss of control, and the dissolution of the old identity so that a new one may emerge. It is the total abandonment of the ego, the recognition that the journey requires complete surrender. These stages of departure are not merely literary elements, but reflections of the human condition. All of us at some point are called to adventure, whether by an unexpected change, an unavoidable crisis, or a deep desire for transformation. All of us face refusal, the fear of change. All of us seek aid, whether in teachers, friends, or our own intuition. All of us cross thresholds, that force us to leave behind old versions of ourselves. And all of us inevitably descend into the symbolic belly of the whale, where we are undone in order to be reborn. Campbell showed that this departure is the universal beginning of the journey, reminding us that there is no evolution without rupture, and no hero without the courage to cross into the unknown. After departure, the hero crosses the boundary and enters the unknown territory, where he faces the longest and most transformative phase of the journey, initiation. This is where the trials, decisive encounters and confrontations with forces occur that not only test his endurance, but also shape his essence. Initiation symbolizes the process of spiritual, psychological, and existential maturation of the hero, and each stage reflects a deep archetype of human experience. The first major stage of initiation is the road of trials. The hero encounters a succession of challenges that demand courage, intelligence, loyalty, and faith. These are obstacles that cannot be overcome all at once, but only in sequence, as a gradual preparation for the greater confrontation yet to come. Odysseus, in his Odyssey, must overcome monsters, hostile gods, and seductive temptations in a long pilgrimage. These tests represent the inevitable adversities of life, failures, disappointments, losses, and fears which, when faced, strengthen the spirit and mature the character. Next comes the meeting with the goddess, an archetype symbolizing love, wholeness, and the revelation of the totality of being. The goddess is not merely a concrete female figure, but a symbol of completeness and reconciliation with one's own essence. For many heroes, this encounter represents the discovery of wisdom, grace, or an inner strength that transcends the ego. This moment is crucial because it reminds us that the journey is not only about struggle, but also about union with something greater, whether human love, divine wisdom, or spiritual consciousness. But in parallel, there is woman as temptress, a stage that shows the other side of the symbolic feminine. Here the hero is seduced into straying from his mission by pleasures, illusions, or the promise of easy shortcuts. This temptation symbolizes the risk of attachment, of forgetting the purpose, and of falling into stagnation. Odysseus faced the sirens, whose sweet voices offered comfort, but also meant the death of his mission. This stage, at its core, represents the universal struggle against temptations that pull us away from our essential path, whether they are addictions, illusions of power, or the blind pursuit of pleasure. Another central point of initiation is the atonement with the father. The hero must face the paternal figure, which may appear as a god, a king, a supreme authority, or even a cosmic force. This confrontation is not only external but symbolic. It is about integration with the greater law, overcoming inner conflicts with authority, and recognizing one's own power. Moses ascends the mountain to receive divine law. Jesus surrenders to the will of the Father. In many cultures, the hero must submit to the judgment of a higher force to prove his worthiness. It is at this point that the hero achieves spiritual maturity, transcending the opposition between rebellion and obedience. Then comes apotheosis. The hero, having overcome crucial trials, experiences an expansion of consciousness and a state of enlightenment. Here he transcends the limits of the ego and understands truths that were once hidden. This moment is described in religions as union with the divine, mystical ecstasy, or the vision of the absolute. Buddha, attaining enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, is the clearest representation of this stage. Apotheosis is not only victory but a metamorphosis. The hero is no longer the same. He now exists on another level of consciousness. Finally, initiation culminates with the ultimate boon, also called the attainment of the supreme reward. This boon may be literal, such as a sacred object, or symbolic, such as wisdom, spiritual power, or reconciliation with existence itself. What matters is that this conquest represents the pinnacle of the journey, that which justifies the entire passage, all the suffering, and all the trials. This moment is the revelation of meaning, the victory that prepares the hero to return to the ordinary world not as a common person, but as a bearer of transformation. The trials of initiation are, therefore, much more than adventures. They reflect the inner processes of every human being in the face of life's crises, the road of failures and lessons, the temptation to abandon the path, the need to reconcile with greater forces. the enlightenment that comes after pain, and the final reward of a renewed consciousness. Campbell showed that this phase is the heart of the hero's journey, because it is here that the true alchemy takes place. The hero not only defeats enemies, but transforms himself into something greater than he was. After passing through the trials of initiation and obtaining the boon, the hero faces the last phase of the journey, the transformative return. This stage is crucial because, without the return, the entire experience could remain confined to the mythical or symbolic realm of the adventure, without generating real impact. Campbell emphasizes that the hero's journey is not complete until the acquired wisdom is integrated into daily life and the community of origin, transforming not only the individual, but also his surroundings. The first challenge of the return is the refusal of the return, a paradoxical phenomenon in which the hero, having experienced powers, knowledge, or higher states of consciousness, hesitates to return to the ordinary world. This refusal is not whim, but an expression of the fear of losing the ecstasy, of facing again the limitations of ordinary life, or of assuming the responsibility that newfound wisdom imposes. For Plato, the metaphor of the cave illustrates this dilemma. The freed prisoner who sees the light of the outside world struggles to return to the shadows and explain his vision to those still confined. This stage reveals the tension between transcendence and practical life, between insight and application. To overcome refusal, the rescue from without appears, a symbol that the return is not made by willpower alone. The hero may receive guidance, protection, or additional blessings that ease the integration of his new consciousness into the previous world. Classic examples include Hermes guiding Odysseus, angels counseling prophets, or even human allies helping with the transition. This external aid symbolizes the collaboration between visible and invisible forces, reminding us that wisdom, however personal, rarely manifests in isolation. Next comes the crossing of the return threshold, a decisive moment that requires courage and humility. The hero must reintegrate into the community without losing his transformed identity, balancing new knowledge with the expectations of the ordinary world. This threshold is often more challenging than the previous ones, as it demands applying inner transformation in contexts resistant to change. Spiritual leaders, mythical heroes, and great reformers faced similar crises. The challenge was not the power or wisdom acquired, but the ability to communicate and use them for the collective good. The penultimate stage is Master of Two Worlds, a concept that symbolizes the harmony between the mystical world of initiation and the hero's everyday life. Integration allows him to act with authority, compassion, and elevated awareness, becoming a living example of the transformation he has experienced. Moses leading the Israelites, Buddha teaching after enlightenment, and even literary heroes like Frodo returning from Middle-earth illustrate this synthesis. The return is complete when the experience of myth enriches the everyday, inspiring and elevating others. Finally, there is the freedom to live, the final stage that reflects mastery over fear, ego, and inner conflicts. The hero, having internalized the lessons of the journey, walks with courage, authenticity, and generosity, positively influencing his community. This freedom is not the absence of challenges, but the ability to live fully, aware of the meaning of life and his role in the universe. Campbell stresses that this stage symbolizes the individual's complete maturity, the balance between action and contemplation, and the capacity to perpetuate the legacy of the heroic experience. The transformative return shows that the hero's journey does not end with personal victory or the attainment of the boon. True fulfillment arises when acquired wisdom translates into concrete changes, inspiring others, strengthening communities, and perpetuating the evolution of the human spirit. It is the fusion between myth and life, between inner experience and external impact, that ensures the journey transcends the narrative and becomes a practical guide for self-knowledge, courage, and a sense of mission. Campbell demonstrates that every hero, in essence, is an agent of transformation, and that each successful return is an invitation to change and collective fulfillment. Even after the transformative return, the hero's journey does not end exclusively on the external plane. The Tinti inner journey autos emerges, which is the deep exploration of the meaning of the lived experience. Joseph Campbell emphasizes that although external adventures are spectacular and visible, the true essence of the hero's journey manifests in the psychological, emotional, and spiritual growth of the individual. It is at this point that myth becomes a tool of self-knowledge, revealing archetypes, behavioral patterns, and possibilities of transcendence that exist in every human being. The first dimension of this inner journey is the encounter with the true self. During the trials, the hero confronted fears, desires, and limitations. Now he is called to understand his essential identity, free from the masks imposed by society, education, or ego. This confrontation with the deep self symbolizes the need for radical honesty with oneself, for recognizing one's own shadows and strengths, and for integrating denied or repressed aspects. Campbell explains that the absence of this encounter reduces the journey to mere external adventures, while its presence transforms each experience into vital learning. The second dimension is the understanding of purpose, the moment when the hero perceives coherence between his personal story and a greater meaning that transcends individual existence. The boon obtained, which at first might have seemed an external reward, now reveals itself as a profound insight. The accumulated experience serves to guide, inspire, or heal, whether oneself or the collective. Here Campbell relates universal archetypes to concrete life. Overcoming the dragon or the siren is not just combat, but a metaphor for confronting addictions, insecurities, and internal limitations. A third central aspect is the integration of archetypes. Campbell teaches that each mythological figure faced by the hero, gods, monsters, allies, or temptresses, represents internal dimensions of the human psyche. Confronting and reconciling these symbolic images allows the individual to balance opposing forces within himself: courage versus fear, desire versus discipline, ego versus altruism. This integration process is what enables personal mastery, making the hero capable of acting with clarity, awareness, and purpose, not merely reacting to external circumstances, but shaping his own life in a deliberate way. Next comes the dimension of transcendence of pain and suffering. Every trial, every loss or failure during the journey carries within it a lesson that is only revealed as the hero reflects and reconciles his experiences. Campbell shows that suffering is not a mere obstacle, but a catalyst for inner development. Whoever manages to perceive the deep meaning of pain, whoever transforms adversity into learning, becomes capable of living with resilience, empathy, and compassion, transmitting to others the wisdom acquired through lived suffering. Finally, the inner journey culminates in the sense of personal mission, the awareness that existence itself has direction and purpose, aligned with universal principles. Campbell emphasizes that this mission does not need to be grand in material terms, but rather significant in the symbolic and existential sphere. By recognizing one's own vocation, whether to heal, teach, create, or inspire, the hero experiences fulfillment and realization, and his journey becomes an example and guide for others who seek meaning. It is the moment when myth and life intertwine, revealing that the hero's journey is not just a literary narrative, but a map of personal transformation applicable to any individual who wishes to understand and develop their own existence. The inner journey shows that the hero is not defined by external victories, but by the depth with which he integrated the experiences, by the archetypes he understood, and by the ability to transform pain and learning into purpose. Campbell makes it clear that each of us possesses this potential journey, facing trials, discovering hidden strengths, integrating archetypes, transcending suffering, and acting with purpose in the world is, in essence, what constitutes the true heroine or the true hero of one's own life. Joseph Campbell teaches that every mythological narrative, regardless of time, culture, or region, is composed of universal archetypes, symbolic figures that represent fundamental aspects of the human psyche and collective experience. These archetypes do not arise by chance. They are manifestations of recurring psychological patterns, expressed through stories that help human beings understand life, cope with challenges, and guide their inner growth. The structure of myth, according to Campbell, functions as a universal symbolic language, capable of transcending cultures and eras, offering individuals maps for personal transformation. The first central archetype is the hero, a figure who embodies courage, determination, and the ability to face the unknown. The hero is simultaneously external and internal. He may be a warrior, adventurer, or explorer in the material plane, but also symbolizes the psychological and emotional struggle every person faces against fears, weaknesses, and limitations. In all myths, the hero undergoes trials, acquires knowledge or power, faces symbolic death, and returns transformed. This pattern reinforces the idea that the experience of growth is universal and necessary for any path of maturation. Another recurring archetype is the he or shadow, representing fears, repressed desires, internal conflicts, and the dark aspects of the psyche that the hero must confront. Campbell emphasizes that ignoring the shadow results in emotional blockages, self-destructive behaviors, or the repetition of negative patterns. Facing the shadow not only strengthens the hero, but also provides clarity, balance, and authenticity, allowing energy once scattered or unconscious to be directed toward personal growth and the realization of purpose. The archetype of the mentor or helper is equally crucial, symbolizing guidance, wisdom, protection, and inspiration. Mentors such as Gandalf, Hermes, or the fairy godmother not only guide the hero on the narrative plane, but also represent the human need to learn from the experience of others, to seek counsel, and to recognize that no growth is entirely solitary. Campbell observes that the presence of the mentor facilitates the crossing of challenges, reveals the path to the boon, and prepares the individual to integrate the acquired wisdom into the ordinary world. The archetype of the mother, is, or maternal figure, is another constant presence symbolizing care, nurturing, fertility, and security. In many stories, the mother or protector offers the safe environment from which the hero departs or the necessary refuge after the trials. Campbell relates this figure to the psychological need for bonding, belonging, and emotional balance, showing that even in the most solitary journeys, contact with maternal energy, internal or external, is essential for regeneration and confidence in life. Finally, there is the archetype of the dragon or guardian, representing external or internal obstacles that challenge the hero to grow. The dragon may be literal, like monsters and enemies, or symbolic, like addictions, insecurities, and existential crises. Campbell highlights that defeating or circumventing the dragon does not mean annihilating it completely, but understanding its symbolic function and using the experience for self-transformation. The struggle against the guardian is, therefore, a metaphor for the need for courage, perseverance, and integration of opposites within the psyche. The structure of mythos itself follows a standardized sequence, described by Campbell as the hero's journey: call to adventure, refusal of the call, supernatural aid, crossing of the threshold, trials, approach to the innermost cave, supreme ordeal, reward, transformative return. Each stage is accompanied by the manifestation of the mentioned archetypes, creating a narrative that not only entertains, but instructs, guides, and transforms. This repetitive and universal structure allows myths to function as a manual of life, providing insights into courage, resilience, purpose, and the integration of experience. Campbell concludes that understanding archetypes and the structure of myth is not merely an academic or literary exercise, but a shortcut to deep self-knowledge. Each individual, by recognizing the mythological patterns that permeate their own life, can reinterpret challenges as trials, fears as shadows to integrate, and opportunities as invitations to transformation. The study of myth thus becomes a practical tool for living with awareness, courage, and purpose, demonstrating that ancestral wisdom is eternally relevant to personal development and the realization of human potential in any era. Joseph Campbell argues that myths are not merely tools for individual transformation, but also play a vital role in social and cultural cohesion. Each myth, although centered on the experience of a singular hero, reflects universal values, norms, and dilemmas that influence entire communities, serving as a moral, ethical, and psychological guide for human groups. The study of the hero's journey reveals that myths function as a collective symbolic system, capable of uniting individuals through shared narratives that legitimize behaviors, reinforce ideals, and provide a sense of belonging. The first social aspect is the educational role of myths. Historically, societies transmitted knowledge, tradition, and practices through symbolic stories that explained natural phenomena, rules of conduct, and essential values. Campbell observes that myth functions as a kind of cultural survival manual. By following the hero's trajectory, the individual learns about courage, perseverance, loyalty, and justice in a memorable and emotionally engaging way. This symbolic pedagogy surpasses mere rational instruction, as it simultaneously activates the imagination, the heart, and the mind, creating internalized experiences that shape behavior and perception. Another central point is the reinforcement of collective identity. The hero's narrative, by reflecting universal challenges and victories, allows members of a society to recognize common life patterns, linking individual experiences to a broader framework. For example, rites of passage, festivals, folktales, and communal celebrations often incorporate mythological structures, showing that each individual is part of a greater tradition. Campbell highlights that this connection with the collective narrative strengthens social cohesion, promotes solidarity, and offers behavioral models that sustain culture over time. Myths also play the role of resolving social tensions and conflicts. By representing universal dilemmas, such as the struggle between good and evil, desire versus duty, or freedom versus restriction, myths provide a symbolic language for discussing, reflecting on, and understanding conflicts in a safe and structured manner. Campbell observes that by experiencing these stories, the community internalizes strategies of mediation, comprehension, and reconciliation, using narrative to symbolically resolve tensions that could otherwise generate disorder or social rupture. In addition, the collective journey emphasizes the transformative impact of heroes on society. Heroes who return with the elixir represent not only personal accomplishment, but also the capacity to influence, inspire, and lead others. Campbell uses historical and mythological examples to show that leaders, spiritual teachers, inventors, and reformers often act as symbolic heroes. Their experience, courage, and wisdom serve as catalysts for social, cultural, or spiritual change, showing that individual growth is inseparable from collective impact. Another element is the ritualistic and symbolic function of myths, which creates and maintains social structures. Initiation rites, harvest ceremonies, celebrations of triumph, or even origin narratives employ symbols and archetypes from the hero's journey to connect individuals to larger cycles of life, death, and renewal. Campbell points out that this ritualistic connection allows the individual experience to be validated and recognized by the community, ensuring cultural continuity and reinforcing social norms. Finally, Campbell emphasizes that understanding the collective journey is essential for developing empathy, systemic vision, and social responsibility. By recognizing that universal myths reflect shared human experiences, individuals can interpret their own struggles as part of a greater context, seeing similarities between their lives and those of others, transcending cultural, ethnic, or temporal divisions. This perspective broadens consciousness and promotes a sense of purpose that is not limited to the self, but integrates personal experience into the well-being of the collective. Campbell's approach demonstrates that the hero's journey has two complementary dimensions: internal, focused on self-knowledge and personal growth, and external, directed toward social integration and collective impact. By understanding and applying these principles, individuals and societies can extract from myths not only entertainment or inspiration, but also life strategies, leadership models, and cultural cohesion that transcend centuries, reinforcing the ongoing relevance of symbolic stories for human development. Joseph Campbell defines the Khan call to adventure as the starting point of the hero's journey, the crucial moment in which ordinary life is disrupted by an opportunity, challenge, or crisis that demands action. This call can take many forms: an unexpected problem, an emotional crisis, a symbolic or literal invitation to explore the unknown. On a psychological level, the call represents the awakening of consciousness, the realization that remaining in the comfort zone is no longer sufficient, and that growth requires courage, change, and facing the unknown. When the hero recognizes this call, they begin a process of transformation that combines a self-knowledge, introspection, and deliberate action. Campbell emphasizes that the refusal of the call is a common and significant stage. It symbolizes the natural fear of the unknown, resistance to change, and protection of the ego. Many individuals ignore or postpone the call, remaining in familiar, though unsatisfactory, life patterns. Refusal is not failure. It is an expression of the instinct for self-preservation. However, myth shows that overcoming hesitation is essential to unlock latent potential, reveal higher purposes, and integrate experiences that promote emotional and intellectual maturity. The call to adventure also functions as a catalyst for the discovery of purpose. Campbell observes that when the hero accepts the call, they embark on a journey that reveals hidden talents, core values, and deep passions. This acceptance is not only literal but symbolic. It represents commitment to one's own development, responsibility before life, and readiness to face challenges that, though uncertain, hold the potential for transformation. The adventure is therefore inseparable from the evolution of consciousness and the alignment with meaningful goals. Another central aspect is the presence of the guide or mentor, a figure who often appears soon after the call. Mentors help the hero interpret signs, understand the unwritten rules of the new world, and prepare for initial trials. Campbell emphasizes that the mentor represents the accumulated wisdom of experience, enabling the hero to advance more safely and consciously. In everyday life, these mentors may take the form of advisors, books inspiring models, or past experiences that provide symbolic or practical guidance. The crossing of the threshold which follows the call marks the step from the known world into the unknown, where rules, expectations, and challenges are entirely different. This moment demands courage, adaptability, and trust as the hero encounters situations that test their resilience, skills, and convictions. Campbell explains that the threshold is simultaneously a space of fear and opportunity, symbolizing the point where true growth begins, since all that was safe and familiar is left behind, and new ways of thinking, acting, and feeling must be adopted. The call to adventure is also intrinsically linked to the discovery of internal resources. During this stage, the hero identifies strengths, talents, and competencies that were previously latent or underestimated. Campbell argues that the initial confrontation with challenges reveals psychological and emotional capacities that remain hidden as long as routine and the comfort zone prevail. This internal discovery is fundamental as it establishes the foundation for facing more complex trials and symbolizes the first conscious encounter with one's own potential for transformation. Finally, Campbell reinforces that the call to adventure is a metaphor for human life. All individuals face moments in which they are invited to transcend limitations, question habits, challenge fears, and assume responsibility for their own destiny. Recognizing and responding to this call allows each person to become the protagonist of their own story, connecting with greater purposes, with their essence, and with the potential to positively impact the world around them. This initial stage is, therefore, the awakening of consciousness and the beginning of the journey of self-transcendence, showing that the external adventure is always a reflection of inner transformation. In the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell emphasizes that after the call to adventure and the crossing of the threshold, the protagonist encounters a series of trials that test his abilities, courage, and values, confronting him with dilemmas, dangers, and forces that challenge his determination. These tests are not limited to physical obstacles, but also take the form of psychological and moral challenges, revealing internal weaknesses, limiting beliefs, and shadow zones within the hero himself. Each trial becomes a symbolic opportunity for growth, learning, and integration of experiences, being essential for the individual to evolve and achieve emotional and intellectual maturity. Campbell describes that the enemies encountered along the journey represent both external and internal aspects: oppressive authority figures, hostile social forces, mythical monsters, or even traits of the hero's own personality that he has not yet mastered, such as pride, fear, or impulsiveness. The confrontation with these antagonists serves to challenge the hero's identity and provoke transformation, requiring flexibility, intelligence, and courage. Symbolically, enemies act as mirrors that reflect fears, conflicts, and inner limitations, offering an opportunity for profound self-knowledge and the overcoming of psychological barriers. In parallel, allies appear as support, guidance, and inspiration. Mentors, companions on the journey, symbolic animals, or magical objects provide resources, strategies, and motivation to face the trials. Campbell stresses that these allies not only assist in practical tasks, but also represent internal aspects of the hero, such as courage, wisdom, empathy, and resilience, manifested externally to reinforce the capacity for action and the strengthening of character. The relationship between hero and allies highlights the interdependence between individual self-discovery and collaboration, showing that even deeply personal journeys require connection with others to achieve fulfillment and realization. Each trial follows a symbolic and progressive logic. Campbell identifies that initial challenges are often smaller, allowing the hero to experiment with his abilities, test limits, and understand the world of adventure. As the narrative advances, the trials become more complex and demanding, requiring not only strength or intelligence, but also wisdom, patience, strategy, and adaptability. These intermediate trials act as catalysts for transformation, bringing the hero closer to a deeper understanding of himself, of reality, and of the greater purpose that guides his journey. The interaction with enemies and allies also reveals the importance of balancing internal and external forces. Campbell argues that facing enemies does not necessarily mean destroying or completely eliminating challenges, but learning to integrate, understand, and transcend their lessons. Likewise, allies should not be seen merely as external support, but as personifications of internal qualities that the hero must recognize and consolidate within himself. This symbolic balance between confrontations and support builds the hero's character, shaping the identity that will be necessary for the final challenges of the adventure. Another essential point is the archetypal dimension of trials. Campbell notes that many of these experiences reflect universal patterns, tests of courage, moral dilemmas, deceptions, betrayals, and unexpected revelations. By going through these situations, the hero connects with universal themes of human experience, making his journey meaningful not only on a personal level, but also culturally, as it resonates with collective narratives of overcoming, redemption, and growth that span generations. Ultimately, the trials, enemies, and allies demonstrate that the true transformation of the journey is not linear. Campbell underlines that the hero is continuously challenged, reinforcing the idea that personal growth and the evolution of consciousness require persistence, courage, and continuous learning. Every adversity, every loss, every encounter with opposing or allied forces contributes to the integration of experiences, preparing the hero for even greater crises and, eventually, for the attainment of the elixir that will benefit not only himself, but also the community around him. In the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell describes the approach to the innermost cave as the moment when the protagonist comes close to the most critical point of his adventure, where risks, challenges, and tensions reach their peak. The cave, often symbolized as a dark, unknown, and intimidating place, represents both the confrontation with the greatest fears and the encounter with the deepest aspects of the psyche. Campbell highlights that approaching this place or situation symbolizes the hero's preparation for the supreme ordeal, the ultimate test that will determine whether he is able to transcend limitations, integrate lessons, and achieve true transformation. This stage of the journey requires the hero to gather all the skills, resources, and knowledge acquired so far. The previous trials served as psychological, emotional, and physical training, enabling him to develop resilience, discernment, and self-control. The innermost cave, therefore, is not only an external space, but also an internal territory, a plunge into the hero's very essence, where he confronts ancestral fears, existential doubts, and deep traumas. Preparation for this stage involves introspection, courage, planning, and the ability to recognize one's own limitations without giving in to despair. The supreme ordeal is, according to Campbell, the climax of the journey. Here, the hero faces a challenge that synthesizes all previous difficulties and demands a response that transcends automatic or instinctive reactions. It may take various forms: the confrontation with a powerful enemy, the solving of a complex riddle, the rescue of a loved one, or the making of a critical moral decision. Psychologically, this ordeal represents the clash between ego and self, an opportunity for the integration of the internal and external forces that shape the hero's identity. Success at this stage is often accompanied by profound transformation, symbolizing the acquisition of wisdom, power, and emotional balance. Campbell emphasizes that the supreme ordeal is not limited to external confrontations. Often, it is an internal test, a battle against doubts, vices, fears, or limiting patterns. Mythological narratives illustrate that the hero must face what he fears most within himself, confronting shadows, repressed emotions, and past traumas. This confrontation allows him to emerge from the cave not only as a victor over the external challenge, but as someone who has gained mastery over himself, reaching a higher level of consciousness and personal integration. Another essential element is the presence of allies and symbolic objects that may aid the hero at this stage. Mentors, talismans, or archetypal symbols function as instruments of guidance, strength, and protection, reminding us that even in the supreme ordeal, the hero is not entirely alone. Campbell observes that interaction with these elements reinforces the capacity for action, confidence, and the perception that challenges, no matter how intense, can be faced with wisdom, preparation, and emotional balance. The innermost cave and the supreme ordeal also symbolize death and rebirth, central concepts in Campbell's work. Entering the cave represents a kind of symbolic death of the old hero, of behaviors, beliefs, or limitations that no longer serve him. Success in the ordeal leads to a psychological and spiritual rebirth, enabling him to return to the world with new powers, expanded vision, and renewed purpose. This process reflects the idea that true evolution only occurs when we confront, integrate, and transcend the deepest and most challenging elements of our existence. Finally, Campbell emphasizes that this phase prepares the hero for the final reward or elixir, the gift that will be shared with the world or used to transform his reality. The approach to the cave and the supreme ordeal consolidate learning, test strength, and determine whether the journey has reached its essence. Transformation, self-knowledge, and the ability to positively impact one's own destiny and the community. It is the moment when myth becomes reality, showing that life's greatest challenges not only test the hero, but also empower him to transcend limits and find profound meaning in his existence. The final stage of the hero's journey, according to Joseph Campbell, is marked by the highest reward achieved after the supreme ordeal, the highest return to the ordinary world, and the high definitive transformation of the protagonist. This phase synthesizes the entire trajectory, granting the hero not only a tangible or symbolic prize, but above all, a profound inner growth, the result of confronting personal fears, limitations, and challenges. The reward can take multiple forms: a magical object revealing knowledge, reconciliation with the world or with oneself, newly acquired skills, or the ability to heal, inspire, and lead others. Campbell emphasizes that this gift is not merely personal. It is meant to be shared, bringing collective benefit, and perpetuating the archetypal function of the hero as an agent of social, spiritual, or cultural transformation. The upon return of the hero is often depicted as a passage back into everyday life, yet it is marked by essential differences. The protagonist is no longer the same person who once departed. He carries within him experiences and lessons that transformed his perception of reality, his understanding of himself, and his role within the community. Campbell explains that this phase frequently involves additional challenges. The hero must reintegrate into ordinary life, communicate his discoveries, and apply the knowledge he has gained effectively. Reintegration symbolizes the imbalance between the extraordinary and the ordinary, highlighting that true wisdom lies in harmonizing inner achievements with the external world, living with purpose, responsibility, and expanded awareness. The final transformation is the psychological, emotional, and spiritual apex of the journey. Campbell points out that the hero, upon completing his cycle, demonstrates a state of integration and maturity that transcends mere victory over external obstacles. He internalizes the mysteries of the mythical world, the trials faced, and the allies encountered, consolidating a strengthened, resilient, and expanded identity. This transformation reflects a deep connection with universal archetypes, allowing the hero to serve as a symbolic model of resilience, courage, and wisdom for others, embodying timeless principles found in myths across all cultures. An essential aspect of this stage is that the reward and transformation are not absolute conclusions. Rather, they indicate a new point of departure, where the hero becomes capable of facing future cycles with greater awareness and effectiveness. Campbell stresses that the hero's journey is, above all, a continuous process of self-discovery and evolution, in which each profound experience, each crisis overcome, and each triumph internalized contribute to the building of a more complete human being, aligned with their life purpose and able to inspire and guide others in their own journeys. Moreover, Campbell highlights that the reward often carries a symbolic meaning that goes beyond its practical utility. It represents the synthesis of learnings, reconciliation with inner shadows, and the attainment of clarity, courage, and emotional balance. Upon returning, the hero carries not only the external gift, but also the inner transformation that enables the creation of new cycles of action, reflection, and positive impact, perpetuating the archetypal power of the myth in personal life and the surrounding world. Finally, the closing of the journey emphasizes the interconnection between adventure and daily life. Campbell demonstrates that the true meaning of the hero's journey lies in the practical application of the lessons learned, in the integration of inner and outer forces, and in the capacity to inspire change, not only for oneself but also for the collective. The final reward, the return and the transformation of the hero, consolidate the idea that life is a succession of challenges, lessons, and rebirths, and that each individual, by embracing their role as protagonist, is capable of reaching maturity, wisdom, and deep purpose. The cycle concludes by showing that the hero myth is not merely an ancient tale but a living metaphor of human experience, a guide to understanding, transcending, and transforming existence itself, proving that each personal journey is, in essence, an opportunity for growth, integration, and full realization.